My name is Siddhi Parab. I'm a clinical exercise physiologist, and I'm here to share my views on why is it that when most people get older, it becomes more difficult for them to lift their arms and legs. For instance, performing simple daily activities like putting on a jacket or climbing up and down stairs seems to be more challenging for them. So, as we age, it becomes harder to maintain your muscular health and fitness. In fact, according to the International Osteoporosis Foundation, or IOF, one starts to lose muscle mass around the age of 40. And even though the rate of decline in muscle mass varies from person to person, one can lose anywhere between 3 to 8% of muscle mass per decade. And this phenomena is called sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass that leads to stiffness of muscles, and in turn, it causes decreased range of motion or decreased mobility. Stiffness is, in fact, considered to be one of the major contributing factors in reduced functionality in the elderly population. So, what exactly is sarcopenia? So, for us to understand sarcopenia, we need to touch base with something called a motor unit. So, what is a motor unit? A motor unit comprises of a single neuron or a single nerve cell that supplies nerve to a group of skeletal muscles. So what happens is this single neuron is stimulated, or it receives a signal from the brain that stimulates all the muscle fibers in this motor unit in order to contract simultaneously with full force in order to perform a particular movement. So for you to perform a particular force, it really depends on how many motor units your body is requiring in that particular time. So for example, if you want to lift a pencil, the number of motor units required for you to do that will be comparatively way lesser than if you want to lift a barbell, because that would be a heavier object and you would require more force in order to lift that up. So that is how the motor units function for you to be able to perform a particular movement. Now, what happens with aging is that these motor neurons die, and that causes denervation of the muscle fibers present in the motor unit. And that leads to atrophy or shrinking of the muscle, and that causes loss of muscle mass. So this is one of the aspects of sarcopenia. And then another factor contributing to the sarcopenia is something called as muscle protein synthesis. So the balance between muscle protein synthesis and protein breakdown really determines what the protein content in the body is. So what happens is with aging, there's a decrease in the muscle protein synthesis that leads to decreased muscle mass. That comes along with sarcopenia. And there's one more factor that contributes to sarcopenia, which is physical activity. So this is one of the factors that can be altered. So it has been proven that physically inactive adults are more likely to show symptoms of sarcopenia in a greater extent as compared to adults who have been physically active. So now that we know that all these are the contributing factors for sarcopenia, how do we prevent this, or how can we take measures in order for us to be healthy enough to not have sarcopenia or to be able to deal with it? So something called as strength training, which we all have heard about, which is also called resistance training, it has been proven to be one of the best interventions in the prevention and treatment of sarcopenia. So we have some guidelines that the ACSM, or the American College of Sports Medicine, has recommended with respect to resistance training in sarcopenia for older adults. So if we look at the frequency, it has been recommended to perform the resistance exercises approximately 2 times per week. 1 time per week would also be sufficient, but if you need better results, 2 times would be ideal per week, with the intensity 10 to 15 reps or 10 to 15 repetitions at an RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, of 12 to 13, which is somewhat hard. and the number of sets required to be performed is 1 set, and the type of exercises, so the number of exercises would be 8 to 10 exercises, which would be focusing on all the major muscle groups. That is, for the upper body, you would focus on the pectoralis muscle or the deltoid muscle, and then for the lower body, you would focus on the hamstrings, the quadriceps, and the gluteal muscles. So these are the major muscles that need to be worked on. And also, it requires that if you are someone who has just started to perform physical activity, especially in the elderly population, you would be required to be supervised or monitored by at least a personal trainer in order for you to be able to establish an exercise regimen, and then so that you can accordingly progress in your resistance training program as well.